Hi, welcome to the second chapter on the Gukesh Qgd. In the previous chapter, we had discussed the main line after CDED bishop g5, bishop b4, e3, h6, bishop h4, g5, bishop g3, knight e4, knight e2, h5. Apart from knight e2, queen c2 is one of the critical options which we need to check. And after knight e2, h5, there are two critical systems. One is h4, which we have checked in the previous chapter, and then there is h3. This is the starting point of the current chapter. The point of h3 is very obvious. For h4, white wants to play bishop h2 and keep the bishop on the board. Now, when comparing this move with h4 instead of h3, white has not created a weakness, but at the same time is not threatening our pawns on the king side. So because of this, we are not really obligated to develop with bishop g4, and we can just look out for simpler moves, because the problem with bishop g4 was we had to check out those f3 ideas, right? Now we are not really bothered about that because our knight on e4 is quite stable for the moment. And secondly, there is no h into g5 followed by rook h5 ideas. So what do we do here? We know that our pieces on the queen side are not developed, so we need to develop one of them. Which one? Knight c6. This is not the most popular move, but I would argue this is one of the strongest moves in the position. There is bishop into... So first let's discuss why bishop into c3 is not good. And what we are trying to do is forcing white to either worsen the pawn structure with bc3 or force them to play knight into c3. This is the strongest move, although it doesn't look like it, because after knight g3, f into g3, it seems like white's pawn structure on the king side is horrible, right? But the issue is we have weaknesses on d5 and f7. We can't castle due to the weak pawn on h5, and white is very quick with their development. If we now have to develop these pieces, and let's say we play queen d6 with the idea of developing this bishop, knight c6 and long castle. White has bishop d5 check, getting the bishop out, c6, and the very strong short castle, sacrificing a piece for initiative. Now our king is stuck in the center, white's opening up the position, white's rook are red. This rook is already active, and this queen is coming into the action. The rook would join soon, and our king is in a very precarious situation. Because of that, we firstly develop our queenside piece and keep the option of playing knight g3 later on. Now we are threatening to play bishop into c3, bc3 and knight g3 because we can play bishop e6, queen d6 and castle long, take our king to the safe zone. White has a couple of choices here. There is a3 and there is bishop h2, getting the bishop out of knight into g3 ideas. Let's start with a3. It makes sense because you're forcing us to play bishop into c3, which wasn't a good move earlier, but now it's good because we have an extra tempo of knight c6. If white plays knight into c3, b into c3 is not good because you're spoiling your pawn structure on the queen side, and we can try to target the weakness on f2 with h4, winning a tempo, gaining space, forcing the bishop back, and now attacking the weakness with queen f6, at the same time getting a piece out in the game, f3. And now we just bring back our knight to d6, from where it eyes the f5 square, the c4 square, keeping eyes on the pawn on e3, which is very weak. We then want to play bd7 and long castle. Black is better because of better pawn structure, more weaknesses in white's position, and simply better positioning of the pieces. Our idea is very straightforward. We want to get the bishop out, castle long, and then start targeting this weakness on e3. That brings us to knight into c3. And now we can take f into g3, queen d6, threatening queen g3. And if white plays queen f3 now, we are just in time to play bishop e6 and long castle. And once we get our king to c8, there won't be any issues because now this king is not weak and white has to deal with this poor pawns. So this is not great for white. And that brings us to the main line. with bishop h2. So white spent a tempo with on bishop h2. So white has to spend some time, but is now threatening to play f3 and kick away our active knight on e4. How do we deal with this? We play g4, stopping f3 and trying to open up the king side. Before we go here, it makes sense to check a couple of lines. Sorry, we play queen f6. So queen f6 is very natural, trying to target this weakness, but this has been played in all the OTB games in this line. But after f3, knight into c3, knight into c3, white keeps an edge because these pawns on c7 and d5 are weak. And white wants to play rook c1 followed by a3, forcing us to give up the bishop pair. This pawn is weak, but we are not in time to attack it because white always has king f2. And then threats of knight d5 is also in the air. Mind you, white is also trying to win the pawn with bishop c7 directly. Abdusattorov played it and Grandmaster Ivic Velimir also played it, but I don't think this is the strongest option in this position. Instead, g4, trying to open up the position, is far more stronger. We are threatening to play gh3, and after gh3, we have this open h file. We also have ideas of queen h4 targeting the weakness on f2. White now has several choices, but the strongest one of them is queen b3. I'm sorry, not the strongest, the most natural one. The strongest one is bishop f4, which is the computer's preference. White opens up the h file for the rook and basically covers this f2 square from h4. And if we play queen h4, white wants to play knight g3. And the point is that the bishop is not really restricted on h2. It's very deep, and no human without the right kind of computer assistance can play this. They need to know this beforehand. And we have already in uncharted territories, so I don't think this is very likely to happen. We'll still play g into h3. And again, white has two choices. The strongest one, rook c1, which is the stockfish idea. And the point and basically this explains the point of bishop f4. Let's start with gh3, which is significantly weaker. Why? Because we are right in time to develop our c8 bishop to f5. If you have checked the previous chapters for earlier, you now know that the bishop is active on f5 in Qgd and is significantly worse on e6. In this position with gh3, white has spent time and allowed us to play bishop f5. Our idea is now very simple. We want to get the queen out to either d7, h4 and castle long. If white plays queen b3 now, okay, a3 runs into queen h4. Now knight g3 is slow due to knight c3. And rook h2 runs into bishop into c3, spoiling the king's side here. Knight into c3, knight into c3, bc3, and long castle. If just at the first glance, we know that our king is very safe. White's king is horrible. White's rook on h2 is bad. White probably doesn't want to castle long as well, so the king is stuck in the center. Our pawn structure is better too. So it just feels much more comfortable for black, even though the computer is able to hold equality with the tricky rook g2. So a3 won't be played. Queen b3, threatening to play a3 and basically not spoiling pawn structure after bishop c3, knight c3 and queen c3. What do? White's idea is a3, so we can be prophylactic and play a5. The idea is that after a3, we play a4 and we want to maintain our bishop on this active diagonal with bishop a5. White can't play queen c2 because of this spin. And if the queen goes back to d1, it's way too slow for white. Bishop a5, and then again we have the ideas of rook g8, queen h4, long castle. We might not even need to castle long. We'll start by playing rook g8 and then just try to attack white's weaknesses on the king side. So this variation with gh3 is not good. And that brings us to rook c1. The idea is to play a3 and meet bishop c3 with knight c3, and rook c3. We have to play bishop e6 here Okay, let's discuss two moves. Why is h into g2 not good? Because after bishop into g2, white is threatening bishop e4, d e4, d5, and we can't move our knight due to queen a4 check. Now all of white's pieces are active. As we have already discussed, we don't want to give up material. Sorry, we don't want to give activity even if it comes at the cost of a pawn. Rather than that, we want to develop our pieces and basically finish our queen side development. So we'll play long castle somehow after playing bishop e6 and queen d7. So we have bishop e6 and bishop f5, two candidates. But why is bishop f5 not good here? Because white is just in time to play a3. And after knight c3, knight into c3, we cannot retreat to d6 because of knight into d5. E7 is very passive. White has queen b3. And we don't want to give up the bishop pair too. Because of that, we have to play bishop e6. And white's critical move is a3. As we already know, gh3 is quite slow. We just play queen h4. And after knight g3, we play long castle. And the position is just so much more pleasant for black. Computer thinks it's 0.00s, which is fine. But in my opinion, from a practical viewpoint, black is already crushing out here. White's king remains in the center, can't go anywhere. The central files are open too. There is also the threat of rook g8, rook into g3. And black's pieces are so much more active. I would be very surprised if white is able to hold this in a practical game. So let's go back and check out a3. This is white's idea that after knight c3, knight into c3, white wants to win the pair of bishops, but we have bishop d6, and this way, this is the reason why we played bishop e6, to defend the pawn on d5. And the position is now very balanced because after bishop into d6, we have the intermezzo hg2. This time we play hg2 because of the very concrete reason that we are just in time to castle long. The d5 pawn is now very secure and the exchanges don't hurt us because white's king is still very bad. The position is now balanced. I don't claim that we have a edge, practical or objective, but at the same time, we are not doing anything wrong in the position, and we still keep plenty of chances to win this position. And that brings us an end to this variation with bishop f4, which is Comp's top choice, but I don't think it's very likely to happen in a practical game. H into g4 is again very bad because you are allowing black to take over the initiative and white is wasting important time in the opening. We play queen h4, target this weakness on f2, and after g3, we play queen f6. Again, we have provoked g3 so that this bishop on h2 is now dead. And after bishop g1, okay, just by the looks of this, bishop into g4, black is crushing. You need to castle and just put pressure on white's pieces. By the way, h into g4 is not a good move due to bishop into c7 and our rook is now hanging on h8. Rook c1 is possible, but after gh3, bishop f4, we transpose to the early bishop f4 line with gh3 and rook c1. So basically, g4, white's most natural move is queen b3. White brings out a queen, puts pressure on d5, and at the same time, defends c3. White is now probably hoping to castle long somehow, but of course, we won't allow it easily. We start off by gh3, spoil white's pawn structure, and create some weaknesses in the process. G into h3. And what do we do now? Rook g8. We get a rook into the game, bring it to an open file, and stop white from activating the f1 bishop with bishop g2. With every single move, we are getting a new piece into the game, and we are looking to finish our development. At the same time, if it's possible to stop our opponent from developing, it's even better. Because as we have discussed, chess is a zero-sum game where you also win by dragging your opponent down. With rook g8, we improve our position, at the same time stop our opponent from improving their position. So rook g8, And white now has knight f4, which is the only critical try. There is a3, but we just play bishop a5. We don't want to give up the bishop pair and maintain the pressure on this diagonal. Our play is very similar to what we do in lines without a3. So let's just check them, and we don't need to spend so much time additionally on this. You just will get an idea with those lines. If white plays knight g3 to trade this knight, and after d4 castle long, since now there is no pressure on f2, we now play queen h4. And the point is very concrete. We are threatening to play knight f2 and knight g3 and open up the king side. So if we get knight g3 and let's say white plays bishop g3, to give an example, let's say white plays rook b1. Of course, white is not going to play that, but it's just a practical try. Bishop g3, rook g3, fg3, queen g3. This king is now busted. We are going to play bishop f5, long castle, put pressure on these pawns. And even though we are exchanged down, black is clearly crushing because of the weak white king and the activity of the pieces. So white cannot afford to do that. And if white plays knight e4, we have the very concrete queen e4 winning material with this or with this. And this pin now comes in handy. And basically, if we might not get knight into g3 on every move, we might also have knight f2, king f2, and bishop d6 trying to exploit this pin. Again, this position is just not easy to play in a practical game as white. Let's go back to the main line with knight f4. So this is the best approach from white because you not only improve your piece, you target a weakness. We play queen h4, we develop a piece and target white's weakness too. But white had the very cunning long castle in mind. And now white's claim is that our king is in the center while white has finished the queen's side development and white's king is very safe. So what's the issue in this line? The issue for white is that this is hanging and for us it's this pawn. How do we defend against white's threat of knight d5 and at the same time keep chances on attacking white's weaknesses? By playing bishop c3, we take out one of the attackers of the d5 pawn, bc3. Now white has some weaknesses on the queen side, which we can very cleverly exploit with knight e7. So we defend against the threat of knight d5, and now we are threatening to win material with knight into f2. White plays knight into d5, and we play knight into d5, queen d5. It seems like white's position is promising since white has a pawn, white has pair of bishops, and white's king is more safer, apparently. But now the queen on h4 is not doing anything. The king is now on the queen side, not on the king side. So we play queen e7 and get our queen towards the weakness on a3. Now the position is balanced since we are threatening to play knight f2 as well as queen a3 check. White keeps the balance after bishop b5 check, and there is a way for white to hold with a perpetual check, but white is not better anymore. And it's okay. Okay, it's good to know why didn't we play c6 here, because white had queen e5 check. That's why we start with queen e7, because we have knight into f2 and there is no check. And after bishop b5 c6, there is a double attack. And that brings us an end to this line with h3. To sum up this line, basically we are still looking to attack white's weaknesses. So d4 d5, c4 e6, knight c3, knight f6, cd ed, bishop g5, bishop b4, e3 h6, bishop h4, g5, bishop g3, knight e4, knight e2, h5, h3. What is our plan? Our plan is very simple. Get the pieces in, attack white's weaknesses on the king side. We do attack white's weakness on the queen side in the later stage of the main line, but the initial idea is to just attack the weaknesses on the king side. We firstly get our knight out. White needs to play bishop h2. Then we attack the h3 pawn with g4, gain space and make the threat of queen h4. After queen b3, okay, bishop f4, gh3, rook c1 with the idea of a3 is promising for white. But with bishop e6, we shut down all those ideas since a3 runs into knight c3, knight c3, bd6. Now the d5 pawn is safe, so we are not worried about any tactics from white side, and we just want to get the queen out of the harm's way and castle long. So instead of this, if white plays queen b3, we take, play rook g8, stop bishop g2 and get one of the pieces into the game, knight f4, and now we play queen h4. And after long castle, bishop c3, bc3, knight e7, we are threatening knight f2, knight d5, queen d5, queen e7. The queen swings back to the queen side, and we have a balanced position in our hands. All right, that sums up the chapter, and I'll see you in the next one.